Hey crew, it's Pitt and I am back with some more common sense. Today we are diving back into the works of Bertrand Russell. This is the In Praise of Idleness. We are on Chapter 3, Architecture and Social Questions. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points that are brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but some people seem to find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. A particular note again today is almost certainly going to be the Exploring Ideologies, which this will be a part of, where we discuss Karl Marx to begin with. With that being said, we are going to dive in and continue our exploration with Part 3, Architecture and Social Questions. Architecture from the earliest times has had two purposes. On the one hand, the purely utilitarian one of affording warmth and shelter. On the other, the political one of impressing an idea upon mankind by means of the splendor of its expression in stone. The former purpose sufficed as regards the dwellings of the poor, but the temples of gods and the palaces of kings were designed to inspire awe for the heavenly powers and for their earthly favorites. In a few cases, it was not individual monarchs, but communities that were glorified. The Acropolis in Athens and the Capitol in Rome showed forth the imperial majesty of those proud cities for the edification of subjects and allies. Aesthetic merit was considered desirable in public buildings and, later on, in the palaces of plutocrats and emperors, but was not aimed at in the hovels of peasants or the rickety tenements of the urban proletariat. In the medieval world, in spite of a greater complexity in the social structure, the artistic motive in architecture was similarly restricted. Indeed, even more so, for the castles of the great were designed for military strength, and if they had beauty, it was by accident. It was not feudalism, but the church and commerce that gave rise to the best buildings of the Middle Ages. The cathedrals displayed the glory of God and his bishops. The wool trade between England and the Low Countries, which knew the kings of England and the dukes of Burgundy to be its hirelings, embodied its pride in the splendid cloth halls and municipal buildings of Flanders, and, less magnificently, in many English marketplaces. But it was Italy, the birthplace of modern plutocracy, that brought commercial architecture to perfection. Venice, the bride of the sea, the city that diverted crusades and overawed the united monarchs of Christendom, created a new type of stately beauty in the Doge's palace and in those of the merchant princes. Unlike the rustic barons of the north, the urban magnates of Venice and Genoa had no need of solitude and defense, but lived side by side, and created cities in which everything visible to the not too inquisitive stranger was splendid and aesthetically satisfying. In Venice, especially, the concealment of squalor was easy. The slums were hidden away in back alleys and were never seen by the users of gondolas. Never since has plutocracy achieved so complete and perfect a success. The church, in the Middle Ages, built not only cathedrals but also buildings of another sort, more relevant to our modern needs. Abbeys, monasteries, nunneries, and colleges. These were based upon a restricted form of communism and were designed for peaceful social life. In these buildings, everything individual was Spartan and simple, everything communal and splendid and spacious. The humility of the single monk was satisfied with a hard, bare cell. The pride of the order was displayed in the large magnificence of halls and chapels and refectories. All right, we're going to stop right here. These were based upon a restricted form of communism, is an argument that you can make. They did live communally, but it was not state-sponsored, right? This was religiously sponsored, which you could make the argument it was state, but it was not. It was separate. Not entirely as much as it probably should have been, but it was funded by the church, not necessarily the state. That is an important distinction, right? So this is religious exceptionalism, but not really communism. Communism is the state control of the means of production, right? That's a very specific thing. And so while he is arguing that it is a form of communism, it's really not. It is communalism, which is different. It sounds really close, but there's an extra L in there. That means that people are living communally, right? In communes, not necessarily communist. That is an important distinction. I understand that you may find it trifling, but it is not. And designed for a peaceful social life. Now, this is the important part. Everything individual was Spartan and simple. Now, you can definitely make the argument that that is intrinsic to communism, right? Everything communal was splendid and spacious. Again, you can make the argument that that was, right? Maybe this is the foundations of communism, but it was not communism. It was not state control of the means of production. But this is absolutely the result of central planning, right? You are not nearly as important as making the point is. And that is what is being said here. The cell of the single monk was satisfied with hardware sales. Again, you can make the argument that that is the foundation for communism, because the practical effect of what comes out of communism, where the state actually does have control of the means of production, you can make the argument that this is the outflow of, because this is exactly how it will work out. If you don't believe that, go look at the buildings that are still standing in what once was communist Russia. Go look at North Korea. Go look at China. Go look at any of the examples of actual communism that we have, and you'll see the same thing, right? The state buildings are huge. They are beautiful. Places where people live are a little bit less so. And so, while I disagree that this was a form of form is an easier exception to the rule, right? It is a form of communism. It is not communism. That is an important distinction. The pride of the order was displayed in the large magnificence of halls and chapels and refectories. In England, monasteries and abbeys survived mainly as ruins to please tourists, but colleges at Oxford and Cambridge are still part of the national life and retain the beauty of medieval communalism. And see, there's the word of what it actually was. With the spread of the Renaissance into the north, the uncouth barons of France and England set to work to acquire the polish of the Italian rich. While the Medici married their daughters to kings, poets, painters, and architects north of the Alps, poets, painters, and architects north of the Alps copied Florentine models, and aristocrats replaced their castles by country houses, which, by the defenselessness against assault, marked the new security of a courtly and civilized nobility. But the security was destroyed by the French Revolution, and since that time the traditional styles of architecture have lost their vitality. They linger where the older forms of power linger, as in Napoleon's additions to the Louvre, but these additions have a florid vulgarity, which shows his insecurity. He seems to be trying to forget his mother's constant remark in bad French, "Pourvu que cela dure." There are two typical forms of architecture in the 19th century, due respectively to machine production and democratic individualism. On the one hand, the factory with its chimneys, on the other, the rows of tiny houses for working-class families. While the factory represents the economic organizations brought about by industrialism, The little houses represent the social separateness, which is the ideal of an individualistic population, where high ground rents make large buildings desirable. They have a merely architectural, not a social unity. They are blocks of offices, apartment houses, or hotels whose occupants do not form a community like the monks in a monastery, but endeavor, as far as possible, to remain unaware of each other's existence. That is not communalism for sure. Wherever in England the value of the land is not too great, the principle of one house for each family reasserts itself. As one approaches London, or any large northern town by rail, one passes endless streets of such small dwellings, where each house is the center of an individual life, the communal life being represented by the office, the factory, or the mine, according to locality. Social life, outside the family, so far as architecture can secure such a result, is exclusively economic, and all non-economic social needs must be satisfied within the family or remain thwarted. If the social ideals of an age are to be judged by the aesthetic quality of its architecture, the last 100 years represent the lowest point yet reached by humanity. The factory and rows of small houses between them illustrate a curious inconsistency in modern life. While production has become increasingly a matter in which large groups are concerned, our general outlook in everything that we regard as outside the sphere of politics and economics has tended to become more and more individualistic. This is true not only in matters of art and culture, where the cult of self-expression has led to an anarchic revolt against every kind of tradition and convention, but also, perhaps, as a reaction against overcrowding in the daily lives of ordinary men and still more of ordinary women. In the factory, perforce, there is social life which has produced the trade unions. That is not what produced the trade unions. But at home, each family desires isolation. I keep to myself, women say, and their husbands like to think of them sitting at home, waiting for the return of the master of the house. These feelings make wives endure and even prefer the separate little house, the separate little kitchen, the separate drudgery at housework, and the separate care of children, while they are not at school. The work is hard, the life monotonous, and the woman almost a prisoner in her own house. Yet, all this, though it frays her nerves, she prefers to a more communal way of life, because separateness ministers to her self-respect. No, because separateness keeps people from fighting, right? I am an exceptionally friendly person. I do my walk every morning, and I have met just about all of my neighbors. Not every one of them, but most of them. Any of them that are outside, I have communications with. But it is light, topical communication. We do not dive into deep topics. You want to know why? Because deep topics breed derision. And if you don't agree with your neighbor and you start fighting, that is a dire situation. Now, if you were unaware, I have an extreme idiot live next to me. He is schizophrenic, but refuses to take his medicine. He has no concept of physical bounds. He doesn't understand boundaries at all. And so, me and his interaction is not nice. And because of that, we both keep to ourselves. That is the underlying reason for this. It has got nothing to do with self-respect, right? It has to do with keeping things harmonious. Good fences make good neighbors, and that is a real thing. The preference for this type of architecture is connected with the status of women. That is untrue. In spite of feminism and the vote, the position of wives, at any rate, in the wage-earning class is not much changed from what it was. Yeah, you don't want to know what, though? That does indeed change. Not too far in the future from where you are, mister. And we're still building the same individual houses, even though there are 2 people in most households working. Imagine that. The wife still depends upon her husband's earnings and does not receive wages, although she works hard. And keeping house is absolutely working hard. Do not let anybody fool you. Being professionally a housekeeper, she likes to have a house to keep. It would be the same in an apartment, you jackass. The desire to have scope for personal initiative, which is common to most human beings, has for her no outlet except in the home. The husband, on his side, enjoys the feeling that his wife works for him and is economically dependent upon him. And again, that is your interpretation of it, but you are quite a bit of a misogynist, so. Moreover, his wife and his house provide more satisfaction for his instinct of property than would be possible with any different type of architecture. From conjugal possessiveness, both husband and wife, if at any time they feel a wish for a more social life, are nevertheless each glad that the other has so few occasions to meet possibly dangerous members of the opposite sex. Man, this guy's projection is wild, right? If you read through his wiki, you will understand that his parents did not have a great relationship. As a matter of fact, they like to do the dirty deed with other people. And so did all of his wives. Not necessarily him, but his wives sure entertained that thought. And so, though their lives may be cramped and a woman's unnecessarily laborious, neither desires a different organization of their social existence. That changed. All this would be changed if it were the rule, and not the exception, for married women to earn their living by work outside the home. Boy, you about to learn something today, except you're dead and you didn't. In the professional class, there are already enough wives earning money by independent work to produce, in big towns, some approach to what their circumstances make desirable. What such women need is a service flat or a communal kitchen to relieve them of the care of meals, and a nursery school to take charge of the children during office hours. Well, we have that. Except the communal kitchen is called McDonald's, which is fucking stupid. And the nursery school is both like daycare and school. So conventionally, a married woman is supposed to regret the necessity of working away from home, and they do still today, even though they can work outside. Most women, if given the chance, would be homemakers. It is not entirely possible, and most of them don't even realize it. A married woman is supposed to regret the necessity of working away from home, and if, at the end of her day, she has to do jobs ordinarily done by wives who have no other occupation, she is likely to be seriously overworked. But given the right type of architecture, women could be relieved of most of the work of housekeeping and minding children, with advantage to themselves, their husbands, and their children. And, in that case, the substitution of professional work for the traditional duties of wives and mothers would be clear again. Every husband of an old-fashioned wife would be convinced of this if, for a week, he were to attempt taking over his wife's duties. I do that. If you were unaware, I am an injured individual. It is not possible for me to work outside of the home, so I take care of the house. And so I don't speak from inexperience when I speak on these things. The work of a wage earner's wife has never been modernized because it is unpaid. But in fact, much of it is unnecessary, and the rest should, for the most part, be divided among different specialists. But if this is to be done, the first reform required is an architectural reform. The problem is to secure the same communal advantages as were secured in medieval monasteries, but without celibacy. That is to say, there must be a provision for the needs of children. And you just told us that the life in the medieval monasteries was sparse and utilitarian and was not a beautiful existence. They had beautiful things, but that was for other people to look at, not necessarily for you to enjoy. So, you've already made the argument that that was not a good way to live. let us first consider what are the unnecessary disadvantages to the present system in which each working class household is self-contained, whether in the form of a separate house or of rooms in a block of tenements. The gravest evils fall upon the children. Before they are of school age, they have far too little sun and air. Their diet is that provided by a mother who is poor, ignorant, and busy, and unable to provide one sort of meal for adults and another for the young. They don't need that. They are constantly getting in the way while their mother cooks and does her work. That is a lack of discipline. So is the too little sun and air. With the result that they get on her nerves and receive harsh treatment, perhaps alternating with caresses. And again, this is almost certainly self-inception from his own life. Go back and read his wiki. They never have liberty or space or an environment in which their natural activities are innocuous. This combination of circumstances tend to make them rickety, neurotic, and subdued. And again, he is talking about himself. The evils for the mother are also very serious. She has to combine the duties of nurse, cook, and housemaid, for none of which she has been trained. Almost inevitably, she performs them all badly. She is always tired and finds her children a bother instead of a source of happiness. Her husband is at leisure when his work stops, but she never has leisure. In the end, almost inevitably, she becomes irritable, narrow-minded, and full of envy. And again, this comes down to discipline. You have children, put them to work. They can wash dishes. They can help with food preparation. They can do a variety of things around the house if you have the discipline to make them have the discipline. Right? This is a whole straw man argument. For the man, the disadvantages are less, since he is less in the home. But when he is at home, he is not likely to enjoy his wife's querulousness or the bad behavior of the children. Probably he blames his wife when he ought to blame the architecture, with unpleasant consequences which vary with the degree of his brutality. I do not say, of course, that all this happens universally. But I do say that when it does not, there has to be an exceptional amount of self-discipline, wisdom, and physical vigor in the mother, and the father, and the children, you jackass. But obviously, a system which demands exceptional qualities of human beings will only be successful in exceptional cases. The badness of such a system is not disproved by the existence of rare instances in which its evils do not appear. The cure to all these troubles, simultaneously, it is only necessary to introduce a communal element into architecture. The separate little houses in the blocks of tenements, each with its own kitchen, should be pulled down. In their place, there should be high blocks of buildings round a central quadrangle, the south side being left low to admit the sunshine. There should be a common kitchen, a spacious dining hall, and another hall for amusement and meetings and the cinema. In the central quadrangle, there should be a nursery school, constructed in such a way that the children could not easily do harm either to themselves or to fragile objects. There should be no steps, no open fires or hot stoves exposed to the touch. Plates and cups and saucers should be made of unbreakable material. And generally, there should be the utmost possible avoidance of those things that make it necessary to say "don't" to children. In good weather, the nursery school should be in the open air. In bad weather, except the very worst, in rooms open to the air at one side. All the children's meals should be in the nursery school, which could, quite cheaply, provide them with a more wholesome diet than their mothers can give them. From the time they are weaned until they go to school, they should spend all the time from breakfast till after their last meal at the nursery school, where they should have opportunities of amusing themselves, but the very minimum of supervision compatible with their safety. The gain to the children would be enormous. Their health would benefit by air and sun and space and good food. Their character would benefit by freedom and by escape from the atmosphere of constant, querulous prohibition in which most wage earners spend their first years. Liberty of movement, which can only be safely allowed to a young child in a specially constructed environment, could be almost unchecked in the nursery school, with the result that adventurousness and muscular skill would develop naturally as they do in young animals. The constant prohibition of movement in young children is a source of discontent and timidity in later life, but is largely unavoidable so long as they live in an adult environment. The nursery school, therefore, would be as beneficial to their character as to their health. It is important to note that we have all of these things now, and they have not brought about that, right? Now, it was not executed in the manner that he wants. Now, the communal food, they do that at daycare, they do that at schools, right? The outside issue, right, going out and getting sun, air, and all of that, that doesn't happen nearly as much as it should because we have gotten rid of recess and free play and even PE in lots of cases, right? Physical education, if you don't know what PE is. And so we need to bring that part back, absolutely, but the experiment of public schools has not necessarily gone as it was thought it should, right? The Department of Education is an abject failure. We do have people that graduate with knowledge, but that is due to them being exceptional and not the rule. Most people are mid to average at best. Many people who are completely incompetent still attain their degree and are able to graduate. Like, we literally graduate people that cannot read. That's a problem. And so it is not solved by the communalism that is public education. It is not solved by any of this, right? This is all speculation. Everything he's saying is speculation at his point in life. But for a large part of it, we are living that, right? We have dual incomes. We have people outside of the house. We have daycare centers. We have places that we put the kids so that they will be safe. We spend an inordinate amount of time safing our house against possible destruction for our children, right? We child-proof cabinets and plugs and light switches and doorways, all of those things, and they have not necessarily led to better development. For women, the advantages would be quite as great. As soon as their children were weaned, they would hand them over throughout the day to women specially trained in the care of young children. We do that. They would not have the business of buying food, cooking it, and washing it up. They would go out to work in the mornings and come home in the evenings like their husbands. Like their husbands, they would have hours of work and hours of leisure, instead of being always busy. They would see their children in the morning and evening, long enough for affection, but not long enough for frayed nerves. Mothers who are with their children all day long hardly ever have enough superfluous energy to play with them. As a rule, fathers play with their children much more than mothers do. Even the most affectionate adult is bound to find children trying if there is never a moment's rest from their clamorous demands for attention. But at the end of the day spent apart, both mother and children would feel more affectionate than is possible when they are cooped up together all day. The children, physically tired but mentally at peace, would enjoy their mother's attentions after the impartiality of the women at the nursery school. What is good in family life would survive without what is worrying and destructive of affection. For men and women equally, there would be an escape from the confinement of small rooms and sordidness into large public rooms, which might be as architecturally splendid as college halls. Beauty and space need no longer be the prerogative of the rich. There would be an end to the irritation that comes of being cooped up at close quarters and that too often makes family life impossible. No, the fuck it would not. What would instead happen would be that there would be a multiplication of the irritation that comes up from being cooped up at close quarters with everybody in your fucking building. instead of just a little bit of annoyance with the people that you love most in your particular unit, right? That is ridiculous. And once again, something that can be proven to be wrong. And all of this would be the consequence of an architectural reform. Robert Owen, more than 100 years ago, incurred much ridicule for his cooperative parallelograms, which were an attempt to secure for wage earners the advantages of collegiate life. Although the suggestion was premature in those days of grinding poverty, many parts of it have now become much nearer to what is practicable and desirable. He himself at New Lanark was able to establish a nursery school on very enlightened principles, but he was misled by the special circumstances of New Lanark into regarding his parallelograms as productive units, not merely as places of residence. The tendency of industrialism has been, from the first, to lay too much stress on production and too little on consumption and ordinary living. This has been a result of emphasis on profits, which are associated only with production. The result is that the factory has become scientific and has carried division of labor to the farthest possible point, while the home has remained unscientific and still heaps the most diverse labors upon the head of the overburdened mother. It is a natural result of the domination of the profit-making motive that the most haphazard, unorganized, and altogether unsatisfactory departments of human activity are those from which no pecuniary profit is to be expected. It must be admitted, however, that the most powerful obstacles to such an architectural reform as I have been suggesting are to be found in the psychology of the wage earners themselves. However they may quarrel, people like the privacy of home and find in it a satisfaction to pride and possessiveness. Yes, a celibate communal life, such as that of monasteries, did not raise the same problem. They were taking vows in religious fervor that is completely different. It is marriage and the family that introduced the instinct of privacy. I disagree with that. Like, outside of religious vows, you can be single and still want privacy. I do not think private cooking, beyond that which could be done occasionally on a gas ring, is really necessary to satisfy this instinct. I believe that a private apartment with one's own furniture would suffice for people who are used to it, but it is always difficult to change the intimate habits. The desire of women for independence, however, may lead gradually more and more to women earning their living outside the home, and did, and this, in turn, may make such a system as we have been considering seem to them desirable. It did not. At present, feminism is still at an early stage of development among women of the wage-earning class, but it is likely to increase unless there is a fascist reaction. How is the government doing anything? Perhaps in time this motive may lead women to prefer communal cooking and the nursery school. And you can make the argument that that did happen, right? Women work outside of the home. That leads to communal cooking, but it is in the form of picking up shit that is no good for your body. McDonald's is garbage. Burger King is garbage. You can eat it occasionally and no ill effects, but if you're eating it regularly, you're killing yourself. That is what the communal cooking has evolved into, right? Stop and pick up a bag supper on the way home and eat this vegetable oil drenched food and try and be healthy from that. It will not be from men that a desire for the change will come. Wage-earning men, even when they are socialist or communist, seldom see any need for an alteration into the status of their wives. While unemployment remains a grave evil, and while failure to understand economic principles remains almost universal, the employment of married women is naturally objected to as likely to throw out of work those whose jobs the married women secure. This is an argument from lack, right? I don't argue from lack. I argue from utilitarianness. It is cheaper for the wife to be at home in almost every circumstance if you have more than 2 children. It is more efficient for the parental unit to teach than it is for someone else, especially in the formative years, which would be daycare. Now, you can make the argument against public school and homeschooling, but it is a rule that while they do not possess the social skills of public education, home-educated people who are homeschooled, tend to be a little bit more intelligent. They seem to have a better grasp of the topics, as a rule, than people who are in public education, for a variety of reasons which we can expound upon if people are interested, but it comes down to societal pressures. For this reason, the problems of married women are bound up with the problems of unemployment, which is probably insoluble without a very considerable degree of socialism. Now, there is very little differentiation between communism and socialism. Socialism is the step into communism. It is the state taking control of the methods of production. Now, ideally, in a communist society, that is relegated from the state down to the individuals in charge of that particular cooperative. But in practicality, that never happens. It remains in control of the controlling body, which is the government. The Holodomor, again, is a superb example of that. The proletariat being done away with and people going to the bourgeoisie and confiscating the farmland. They put in place individuals who were representatives of the government to control these collectives who had absolutely no idea of what they were doing. Now, socialism is the direct governmental control of the means of production. Communism is the government has seized the means of control of the means of production and distributed them in the manner that they see most effective. That does not mean that it is effective. It just means that they are buddies with whoever is in charge. So socialism and communism are only separated by the end of that chain, right? Socialism is the state in control, and communism is meant to be the state taking control and then distributing that control to others, which never happens. And so any degree of socialism is not going to work, as well as any degree of communism. The best argument for that, right? People argue for socialized medicine, right? If the government is in control, we have one payer, which is the goal for the socialists here in this particular country for universal medicine. First off, that is mandating somebody else to work, which is slavery. But on top of that, if you believe that socialized medicine can work, I challenge you to do one thing. Go to the VA. Now, if you're not a veteran, you're not going to have access to veteran administration benefits. But those of us who have served know that you get 2 chances to die for your country. The first is during active duty, when you're deployed to combat zones and you get a good chance of being shot. And the second is when you go to the VA, because if you have a need, it will not be met with any reasonable amount of time, right? If you have a surgery that you need done, it's going to be 6 months or more. You're going to be on a waiting list. That is how it works. That is socialism. That is socialized medicine in a nutshell. If you don't believe that, look at Canada. I know, I pronounce it wrong. Up in Canada, they have socialized medicine, and if you have a broken bone, you might get to see a specialist in a week or 2. but probably it's going to be significantly longer than that. If that is not enough for you, look at Great Britain, where they have the exact same problem. The problem with socialized medicine is the lack of incentive. Lack of incentive leads to lack of availability. Lack of availability leads to you sitting on a waiting list with a broken leg for weeks at a minimum. That is a problem. That is an insolvable problem with the government being in control. I can bring you through a multitude of examples of that exact same problem in a variety of different applications in life. Education, healthcare, government benefits, welfare system, all of these are detrimental more than they are beneficial. Back to the text. In any case, however, the construction of cooperative parallelograms, such as I have been advocating, could only come on a large scale as part of a large socialistic movement, since the profit motive alone could never bring it about. It's because it's useless. The health and character of children and the nerves of wives must, therefore, continue to suffer so long as the desire for profit regulates economic activities. Some things can be achieved by this motive and some cannot. Among those that cannot is the well-being of wives and children in the wage-earning class, and, what may seem even more utopian, giving beauty to the suburbs. Interesting side note here. Utopia is perfection, and it has been discovered through experimentation that living in a utopian society leads to discontent almost exclusively. But, although we take the hideousness of suburbs for granted, like March winds and November fogs, it has not, in fact, the same inevitability. If they were constructed by municipal instead of private enterprise with planned streets and houses like the courts of colleges, there is no reason why they should not be a delight to the eye. We do that without the government, right? Back in the beginnings of suburbs, they were, admittedly, quite dreary, right? But nowadays, take a ride through the suburbs and you will see a diversity of expression. You will even, in some cases, find beauty. Now, most of what has been built between the 30s, when this was, and the 90s to 2000s was pretty uniform, right? Depending upon the era and the particular style and fashion. But you do see individuation even within, as long as you're not in one of them fucking socialist homeowner associations. And so, every instance of the government doing the actual planning has proven to be not great, right? When it is allowed through private enterprise, as we do, you get to see better designs and you get to see more diversity in those designs, right? Here we have all kinds of subdivisions. The one I live in looks different than the one that is just to the south of me and the one that is just to the north of me. We have differentiation. That is a purely commercial thing. If it was up to the government, they would all look exactly the same, like communist block housing. So, the delight to the eye is a personal taste thing, which we have developed and are still developing, but it is not a result of the government. Right? Hideousness, as much as worry and poverty, is as part of the price as we pay for our slavery to the motive of private profit. Alright, so that is going to bring us to the end of architecture and economics. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat difficult topic. I understand that I hold some unconventional beliefs and I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something I apologize for. The things which I relay, I have spent an awful lot of time thinking about. I personally used to lean socialist. That was one of the misconceptions of youth that I held. I looked as though utopia would be great, even though it has been proven that it wasn't, because I was ignorant of that. The differentiation of the species is the best way for us to allow ourselves to express. My yard and my neighbor's yard look nothing alike. My yard and that neighbor's yard look nothing alike. We are allowed to express ourselves through differentiation because of capitalism. If we were communist, like we can take this example, the homeowners association, right? You may not identify that as communist or socialist, which is basically the same thing, but it is. You are paying your dues, taxes, to a governmental agency, the homeowners association, so that they ensure compliance with the laws that keep everything uniform. That is exactly what would happen if the government was in charge, right? If the government is in charge of housing, all of the houses are going to look exactly the same. That is a fundamental characteristic of uniformity in government. I leaned socialist. I do not anymore. I lean communal, right? We talked earlier about that word, communalism. Communalism, as opposed to communism, is this. You're in charge of your shit in communalism. You can voluntarily associate with the people around you in your neighborhood or your subdivision or whatever you want to call it, and mutually come to the aid of others, right? If your neighbor, as happened here, just December the 31st, so 14 days ago, we had a neighbor whose house burned down. As a community, we have come together and given donations to that person. The government did not do anything, right? They responded to the fire and they put the fire out after it burned 3 houses, but they're not replacing anything. That's up to insurance. Insurance is not right away. That's capitalism. Communalism is us, the neighbors, right? We had a neighbor that took in the family to sleep and to go to school. We have other neighbors that are bringing food. We have other neighbors that are bringing clothing. We have other neighbors that are providing different necessities that they have. That is communal, right? Our community is coming together in a communal effort. That is communalism. It is not the government saying, well, you've got a shirt, you give your shirt to this neighbor. That is communism, right? It is not the government saying their house burned down and you have 2 people in a 4-bedroom house, so we're going to take your house and give it to these people. That is socialism. So it is intrinsically different. Capitalism inspires and enables communalism, whereas communism and socialism do not. So I am a firm believer in communalism. I believe that we should all be looking out for our neighbors within reason, and that we should have the autonomy to control our own things. I worked for these things. They are mine. I can do with them as I please. And if it pleases me to give them to my neighbor, that is me acting in a communal fashion. The government coming to take that is acting in a communist fashion. And I will die before I live under communism. Hopefully, we did the enlightenment. So if you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, share, and a sub. Throw me a comment. If you agree or disagree with anything that I have said in this particular study, drop it in the comments. And if it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If there is another work you would like to see me discuss in the manner that we are doing here, drop that in the comments as well. If you really like what I'm doing, hit me with that super thanks, because I am not a communist, but you can be part of my community. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete, just the way that you are. And this has been Pit Steak. Peace.